The widow stood at the edge of her property line, rifle in hand, staring down the tall rancher who had just ridden up with 3 of his ranch hands and a surveyor. And she knew this confrontation had been coming since the day she buried Thomas 6 months ago in the hard Wyoming soil. "Mrs. Harrison, I am not here to cause trouble," the rancher said, dismounting from his bay gelding with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. "My name is Michael Kane, and I own the property adjacent to yours. There has been some confusion about where your eastern boundary ends and my western pasture begins." Jane Harrison kept the rifle pointed toward the ground, but her finger stayed near the trigger guard. At 24 years old, she had already loved and lost more than most women twice her age, and she had no intention of letting some cattle baron sweet talk her out of the land Thomas had died protecting. The summer heat of 1876 beat down on them both, making the grasslands shimmer in waves that looked almost like water. "There is no confusion, Mr. Kane," she said, her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered in her chest. "This fence marks my property. It has been here for 3 years, and it was surveyed proper by the land office in Tropic." Michael Kane removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He was perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of Wyoming sky. "I have documentation that suggests otherwise, but I did not come here to argue. I came to propose we have the land office send someone out to settle this peacefully. The last man who wanted to settle things peacefully with me ended up dead from cholera," Jane said flatly. "So you will forgive me if I am not particularly interested in peace." Something flickered across Michael's face, softer than she expected. "I heard about your husband. I am sorry for your loss, but that does not change the fact that we need to resolve this boundary dispute." "Then I will see you in town with the land office agent. Until then, you and your men stay on your side of this fence." Jane turned her back on them, a calculated risk, and walked toward her small cabin. She could feel their eyes on her the whole way, but she refused to look back or show any weakness. Inside the cabin, she finally let herself shake. The rifle clattered onto the table, and she sank into Thomas's old chair, the wood still holding the ghost of his shape. The walls closed in on her, covered with memories she could barely stand to acknowledge. His coat still hung by the door. His boots waited by the hearth. She had not moved a single thing since the day he died, as though keeping everything in place might somehow bring him back. "I cannot love again," she whispered to the empty room. The words had become her prayer, her promise, her protection. Love had gutted her once. She would not give it the chance to do so a second time. 3 days later, Jane rode into Tropic, the small Wyoming town that served the scattered ranches and homesteads dotting the landscape. The settlement had sprung up along Tropic Creek, named by optimistic settlers who thought the Green Valley resembled paradise. It consisted of one main street with a general store, saloon, church, land office, and a handful of other businesses. The surrounding mountains provided a stunning backdrop, but Jane had stopped noticing beauty months ago. She tied her mare outside the land office and walked in to find Michael Kane already waiting, his hat in his hands and a rolled document on the desk before him. The land agent, a nervous man named Peter Walsh, looked relieved to see her. "Mrs. Harrison, thank you for coming. Mr. Kane has brought his deed and survey maps. If you have yours, we can compare and hopefully resolve this matter." Jane produced her papers, watching Michael from the corner of her eye. He stood a respectful distance away, not crowding her space, and his expression remained neutral. For a wealthy rancher, he seemed surprisingly lacking in arrogance. Peter Walsh spread all the documents across his desk, comparing measurements and landmarks. His finger traced lines on both maps and his frown deepened. Well, this is peculiar. According to these surveys, there is a strip of land approximately 50 feet wide that was never properly assigned to either property. It appears to be a surveying error from when both claims were originally filed. What does that mean for the boundary? Jane asked. It means the fence is actually on unclaimed land. Neither of you has legal right to it, but either of you could file a claim for it. However, Peter looked between them nervously, given that it borders both your properties, the land office would likely split it down the middle. Michael spoke for the first time. That seems fair. 25 feet is not worth feuding over. Easy for you to say when you have 10,000 acres, Jane said sharply. Every foot matters when you are trying to run a homestead alone. Then take the whole strip, Michael said, surprising her. File the claim before I do. I will not contest it. Jane stared at him, searching for the catch, the hidden motive. No rancher gave up land without reason. Why would you do that? Because you need it more than I do, and because I would rather have a neighbor who does not point a rifle at me every time I ride by. He said it without any trace of mockery, just simple honesty. Peter Walsh looked between them with barely concealed hope. Feuds between ranchers had turned bloody before, and he clearly wanted to avoid that outcome. Is this acceptable to you, Mrs. Harrison? She wanted to refuse out of pure stubbornness, but practicality won out. I will accept Mr. Kane's generous offer. Excellent. I will draw up the paperwork. Mrs. Harrison, if you can come by tomorrow, I will have everything ready for your signature. Peter beamed like a man who had just avoided a war. Outside the land office, Michael caught up with Jane as she untied her horse. Mrs. Harrison, might I buy you lunch? The restaurant serves a decent stew, and I would like to discuss something with you. Mr. Kane, I appreciate what you did in there, but I am not interested in socializing. It is not socializing, it is business. He waited, patient as stone. Curiosity got the better of her. She nodded once, and they walked their horses down to the small restaurant wedged between the general store and a barber shop. Inside, they took a table by the window, and Michael ordered stew for both of them without asking what she wanted. She bristled at the presumption but said nothing. I own one of the largest cattle operations in this part of Wyoming, Michael began without preamble. But I am short on good grazing land this season. Your property has Tropic Creek running through it, which means you have water and the best grass in the valley. I would like to lease your eastern pasture for my cattle. I will pay you a fair price and provide hands to maintain the fencing. Jane's stew arrived, and she stirred it slowly, thinking. The offer was tempting. She had been struggling to figure out how to make the ranch profitable enough to survive. Thomas had planned to raise horses, but he died before they could buy good breeding stock. The land sat mostly empty now, just her small vegetable garden and a few chickens. How much? She asked. Michael named a figure that made her blink. It was more money than she had seen in 6 months. That is too much. It is what the grazing is worth to me. My cattle need good grass, and I am willing to pay for it. The lease would run through the end of autumn, with option to renew in spring. Why not just try to buy me out? Most ranchers would. Because you are not selling, and I am not interested in forcing people off their land. He met her eyes directly. My father built his ranch by being fair and keeping his word. I intend to do the same. Jane considered. The money would let her buy supplies for winter, maybe even purchase a horse or two in spring. But accepting his help felt like opening a door she had sworn to keep closed. Still, pride would not keep her warm when snow fell, and stubbornness would not fill her belly. I want the agreement in writing, proper legal, she said. Of course. I will have my lawyer draw up a contract and bring it by your place tomorrow. They ate in silence for a while. Jane found herself studying him when she thought he was not looking. Michael Kane carried himself with quiet confidence, not the swagger she associated with wealthy ranchers. His hands were scarred and calloused from real work, not just giving orders. When he caught her looking, she quickly returned her attention to her stew. "Your husband," Michael said carefully. "He was planning to raise horses." "How did you know that?" "I met him once, about a year ago at the stockyard in Cheyenne. He talked about his plans. He seemed like a good man." The mention of Thomas sent a familiar spike of pain through her chest. "He was, and then he was gone, and I was left with plans that meant nothing." "They do not have to mean nothing. You could still raise horses." "With what money, what knowledge? Thomas knew horses. I know cooking and sewing and keeping a garden. I cannot do this alone." The words came out more bitter than she intended. "Perhaps you do not have to," Michael said quietly. Jane stood abruptly, throwing a coin on the table, though he had said he would pay. "I will consider your lease offer, Mr. Kane. Good day." She left before he could respond, mounting her horse and riding out of town at a pace that bordered on reckless. She could not explain the panic that had seized her, only that something about Michael Kane's kindness terrified her more than any threat or aggression could have. The next morning, Michael arrived at her cabin as promised, bringing not just his lawyer but also a covered basket that turned out to contain fresh bread, butter, and jam. Jane accepted the food with stiff gratitude, unsure what to make of this persistent generosity. The lawyer, an older gentleman named Richard Foster, laid out the lease agreement on her small table. Jane read every word twice, looking for any clause that might trap her, but the contract was straightforward and favorable. Michael had even included a provision that his ranch hands would repair any damage the cattle caused to her property. "This is acceptable," she said finally, reaching for the pen. After they left, Jane stood in her doorway watching Michael and his lawyer ride away. The basket of bread sat on her table, filling the cabin with the warm smell of yeast and comfort. She had not baked bread since Thomas died, could not bring herself to do the things that had once made their house a home. Now this stranger had brought those smells back, unwanted and painful and somehow necessary. Over the following weeks, Jane saw Michael Kane more often than she wanted to. He came to check on the cattle, to oversee fence repairs, to drop off her lease payment. Each time he brought something: vegetables from his ranch garden, a book he thought she might like, a new bridle for her horse because he noticed her old one was cracked. "You need to stop bringing me things," she told him one afternoon when he arrived with a basket of apples. "I have too many apples. They will rot if someone does not eat them," he said simply. "Then feed them to your cattle. Cattle do not make pie." He set the basket on her porch step and tipped his hat. "Good day, Mrs. Harrison." She wanted to throw the apples after him, but that would be wasteful, and she had been raised not to waste. Instead, she made pie, and the smell of it baking brought tears to her eyes because Thomas had loved apple pie, and she had not made it since he died. The next time Michael came by, she had a slice of pie wrapped in cloth waiting for him. She thrust it at him without explanation, and he accepted it with a smile that transformed his usually serious face into something warm and genuine. "Thank you," he said. "My cook makes fine meals, but her pies are terrible. Do not tell her I said so." Despite herself, Jane felt the corner of her mouth twitch. "Your secret is safe." "I am hosting a barn dance next Saturday," Michael said. "To celebrate the end of harvest, I would be honored if you would come." "I do not dance anymore." "You could come and not dance. Just eat and talk with the other ladies. My sister Ellen will be there. She has been wanting to meet you." "Why would your sister want to meet me?" "Because she is nosy and heard I have been visiting you, and now she has decided we are courting and wants to investigate." He said it with such dry humor that Jane almost smiled again. "We are not courting. I know that. You know that. But try explaining it to Ellen. She is a force of nature." He gathered his reins. "Come if you want. No pressure, but there will be good food and better music." Jane watched him ride off, already knowing she would not go. Social gatherings meant questions and pitying looks and people telling her it was time to move on. She had no patience for any of it. But Saturday arrived, and Jane found herself pulling her one good dress from the trunk, the blue calico Thomas had bought her for their first anniversary. It still fit, though she had lost weight since his death. She brushed out her dark hair and pinned it up, studying herself in the small mirror. At 24, she still looked young, but her eyes held an age that had nothing to do with years. The ride to Kane Ranch took half an hour. She could hear the music and laughter before she saw the big barn lit up with lanterns. Dozens of people had gathered, ranchers and homesteaders and townsfolk, all dressed in their finest. Jane almost turned back, but then Michael appeared at her side, materializing as if he had been watching for her. "You came," he said, and the pleasure in his voice was unmistakable. "I have not decided if I am staying." "Fair enough. Let me introduce you to Ellen before you flee." Michael's sister turned out to be a petite woman in her late 20s with the same blue eyes as her brother and a forthright manner that was both intimidating and refreshing. She took Jane's hands in hers immediately. Finally, someone interesting to talk to. All these ranchers' wives want to discuss his recipes and who is courting whom. "Tell me, are you really running your homestead alone?" "I am," Jane said cautiously. "That is magnificent. I wanted to run this ranch when our father died, but Michael got it because he has the magical qualification of being male. Never mind that I can outride and outshoot him." Ellen pulled Jane toward the food tables. "Come, you must try the smoked beef. Our cook outdid himself." Jane found herself swept into Ellen's orbit, introduced to various people whose names she immediately forgot. But Ellen's forthright protection kept away the worst of the pitying looks and awkward condolences. They filled plates and found seats on hay bales along the barn wall, watching the dancers spin across the floor. "Michael has not stopped looking at you," Ellen observed, biting into a roll. "Your brother is just being neighborly." "My brother is many things, but just neighborly is not one of them. He does not make social visits. He does not bring people gifts. And he certainly does not give away grazing land. But for you, he has done all three. So either you have bewitched him or he is smitten." "I have done no such thing, and he is not smitten, he just feels sorry for me." Ellen turned to face her directly. "Michael Kane does not do anything out of pity. He is the most pragmatic man alive. If he is pursuing you, it is because he wants to, not because he feels obligated." "He is not pursuing me. Whatever helps you sleep at night." Ellen took another bite of roll, her eyes twinkling with amusement. Michael approached them, holding 2 cups of punch. He offered one to Jane, who accepted it more out of reflex than desire. "Are you frightening off my guest?" he asked Ellen. "I am making her feel welcome, something you would know nothing about since you have all the social grace of a barn cat." "At least barn cats are useful," Michael replied mildly. He turned to Jane. "Would you like to see the horses? I recently acquired a mare I think you would appreciate." It was clearly an excuse to get her away from Ellen's interrogation, and Jane accepted it gratefully. They walked through the cool evening air to the stable, where Michael lit a lantern and led her to a stall containing a beautiful chestnut mare with a white blaze. "She is a good breeding mare, excellent bloodlines. I bought her from a ranch in Colorado," Michael said. "I thought of you when I saw her. She would be a good foundation for a horse breeding program." Jane reached out to stroke the mare's nose, and the horse nickered softly. "She is beautiful. I want to sell her to you." Jane's hand stilled. I cannot afford her. I will sell her for whatever you can pay, and you can pay me the rest when you can. Or consider it payment for future grazing rights, or a gift. I do not care. I just think you should have her." "Why?" Jane turned to face him, frustration rising. "Why do you keep doing this? What do you want from me?" Michael set down the lantern carefully. In its flickering light, his face was all planes and shadows. "I want nothing from you that you are not willing to give, but I cannot stand to see you drowning when I have the means to throw you a rope. I am not drowning. I am surviving. There is a difference between surviving and living, Jane." It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it in his deep voice did something strange to her heart. "I cannot," she whispered. "I cannot let myself hope or want or feel. It hurts too much when it gets taken away." "I know," he said softly. "I know what it is like to lose someone you love." She looked up at him sharply. "You do. My wife died 4 years ago. Fever took her in 3 days. We had only been married a year." The pain in his voice was old but real, a scar that had healed but never disappeared. "I understand what you are feeling, Jane. The guilt of surviving when they did not. The fear that loving again means betraying their memory. The certainty that your heart cannot take breaking twice." Tears burned her eyes. "Then you understand why I cannot do this, why I cannot let you keep being kind to me." "I understand. But I also know that locking yourself away from the world is not living, it is just a slower kind of dying. And I do not think Thomas would want that for you any more than Catherine would want it for me." "How do you know what Thomas would want?" "Because any man who truly loved his wife would want her to be happy, even if he could not be the one to make her so." Michael took a careful step closer. "I am not asking you to love me, Jane. I am not even asking you to try. I am just asking you not to turn away every bit of kindness or connection that comes your way. Let people care about you. Let yourself care about something again, even if it is just this mare." Jane looked at the horse, who gazed back with liquid brown eyes full of trust and calm. She thought about her empty cabin and emptier days, about the way she had been holding herself together through sheer will and stubbornness. She thought about Thomas and how he had always said she had the strongest heart of anyone he knew. That heart felt broken now, but maybe Michael was right. Maybe it could still beat, even damaged as it was. "I will buy the mare," she said finally. "And I will pay you proper, even if it takes me years." Michael smiled, and she realized it was the first time she had seen him look truly happy. "That is all I ask." They returned to the barn dance, and this time when Michael offered his hand for a dance, Jane surprised herself by accepting. The fiddle music swirled around them as they joined the other couples in a simple waltz. Michael was a good dancer, confident without being showy, and he held her at a respectful distance, even though the dance would have allowed him to pull her closer. "You are full of surprises, Mr. Kane," Jane said as they turned. "Michael, please, I think we are past formalities." "Michael," she corrected, testing his name on her tongue. It felt dangerous and right all at once. The dance ended, and Jane stepped back quickly before the fiddlers could start another song. Michael did not push, just escorted her back to Ellen, who looked entirely too pleased with herself. Jane stayed another hour, talking with Ellen and some of the other women who seemed genuinely kind rather than merely curious. When she finally announced she needed to head home, Michael insisted on riding with her despite her protests. "It is dark, and the trail can be dangerous," he said simply, and there was no arguing with his logic. They rode in companionable silence under a sky full of stars. The Wyoming night was vast and clear, the kind of darkness that felt peaceful rather than threatening. When they reached her cabin, Michael dismounted and helped her down from her horse, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said. "It meant a lot to me." Thank you for inviting me, and for not pushing when I wanted to leave. I will bring the mare by tomorrow, along with the bill of sale. You can pay me whatever you can afford and we will work out the rest." He mounted his horse again, then paused. "Jane, I want you to know something. I am not courting you because I want to fill some empty space in my life, or because I need a wife to run my house. I have a fine house and people to run it. I am interested in you because you are strong and stubborn and brave, and because making you almost smile has become the best part of my day. There is no pressure, no expectation. I just wanted you to know." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and rode off into the darkness, leaving Jane standing in her doorway with her heart hammering and her carefully constructed walls developing cracks. True to his word, Michael arrived the next afternoon with the mare, a saddle, and a bill of sale that listed a price Jane knew was a fraction of the horse's true value. She paid him what she could from her carefully hoarded savings and did not argue when he said the rest could wait. "What is her name?" Jane asked, stroking the mare's neck. "She has not got one yet. I thought you would want to choose." Jane studied the horse, taking in her gentle eyes and proud bearing. "Juniper, she will be Juniper. It suits her." Michael showed her the mare's papers, explaining her bloodlines and history. "She is 5 years old, proven fertile, good temperament. With a quality stallion, her foals would sell well. I cannot afford a stallion, but I have 3. You could bring her to be bred when she comes into season, stud fee on account." Jane shook her head, exasperated. "You are determined to ensure I succeed, are you not?" "I am determined to help a friend. Is that so terrible?" The word friend settled between them, simultaneously disappointing and safe. Jane was not sure which feeling was stronger. Over the following weeks, Jane threw herself into working with Juniper. The mare was everything Michael had promised, intelligent and willing. Having something to care for beyond her chickens and garden gave Jane a purpose she had been missing. She found herself looking forward to mornings, to the routine of feeding and grooming and working with the horse. Michael continued to visit regularly, always with a practical excuse, but increasingly staying to talk. They discussed horses and cattle, weather and crops, and gradually more personal things. He told her about growing up on the ranch, about his father's death 2 years prior, about the challenges of managing such a large operation. She found herself telling him about her childhood in Ohio, about meeting Thomas at a church social, about their decision to head west for opportunities neither could find back east. "You regret coming here?" Michael asked one afternoon as they sat on her porch, watching Juniper graze in the small paddock he had helped her build. "I regret that Thomas did not get to live the life he imagined, but I do not regret the time we had, even though it was short." Jane surprised herself with the honesty. A month ago, she could not have talked about Thomas without breaking down. "Catherine and I used to talk about having children," Michael said quietly. "She wanted a houseful. When she died, I thought I had lost that future forever. It has taken me years to accept that maybe there could be a different future, not a replacement but something new." Jane looked at him, really looked, and saw her own grief and fear reflected back at her. "Does it ever stop hurting?" "No, but it stops being all you feel. Eventually, there is room for other things again." Their eyes met and held. Jane felt something shift inside her chest, like ice beginning to crack. It terrified her, but she did not look away. The moment broke when one of Michael's ranch hands came riding up, apologizing for the interruption but saying there was trouble with cattle breaking through a fence. Michael stood reluctantly. "I need to go handle this. But Jane, would you have dinner with me tomorrow night at the ranch? Ellen will be there, so it is not improper, and I promise she will be on her best behavior." Jane knew she should refuse. Accepting felt like admitting to something she was not ready to acknowledge, but the word that came out of her mouth was, yes. She regretted it immediately and spent the entire next day trying to talk herself into backing out. But when the time came, she dressed in her blue calico again and rode to Kane Ranch, her hands sweating despite the cool autumn evening. Ellen greeted her warmly and immediately pulled her into the house, chattering about the meal and the upcoming winter, and anything except the obvious fact that Michael had set up what amounted to a courtship dinner. The Kane home was impressive. A large two-story house with real glass windows and fine furniture that spoke of wealth accumulated over years. Michael waited in the dining room, dressed in a clean shirt and vest, his hair still damp from washing. The table was set with china and crystal, and the smell of roasted chicken filled the air. It was more formal than Jane had expected, and she suddenly felt underdressed and out of place. "You look beautiful," Michael said, and the simple sincerity in his voice eased some of her tension. Ellen kept up a steady stream of conversation through dinner, preventing any awkward silences. The food was excellent, and Jane found herself relaxing as the meal progressed. After dessert, Ellen excused herself with an obvious wink, leaving Jane and Michael alone with coffee in the sitting room. "Your sister is not subtle," Jane observed. "She never has been. I apologize if she has made you uncomfortable." "She has not. She has actually been very kind." Jane set down her coffee cup. "Michael, I need to be honest with you. I do not know what I am doing here. I do not know what you want from me or what I can offer you." Michael leaned forward, his expression serious. "I want your company, your conversation, the chance to know you better, that is all. I am not asking for promises or commitments, but you are hoping for them eventually." "I would be lying if I said I was not, but I am a patient man, Jane. I can wait. What if I never get there? What if I cannot move past this? Then I will have had the privilege of your friendship, and that will be enough." He reached across the space between their chairs and offered his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Jane took it. His palm was warm and calloused, solid and real. They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, and Jane felt that crack in her chest widen a little more. As autumn deepened into winter, Jane found herself spending more time with Michael. He helped her prepare her cabin for the cold months ahead, repairing the roof and banking earth around the foundation. She cooked for him sometimes, hearty stews and fresh bread that he praised with genuine appreciation. Ellen became a regular visitor too, and Jane realized she was developing her first real female friendship since coming to Wyoming. The first snow came in late November, blanketing the valley in white. Michael arrived at Jane's cabin with supplies and an invitation to spend the worst of winter at the ranch, where she would be safer if a real blizzard hit. Jane refused, unwilling to give up her independence or set that kind of precedent. She did accept his gift of firewood and preserved food, though, recognizing that pride could be deadly in a Wyoming winter. December brought bitter cold and several significant snowstorms. Michael checked on Jane after each one, arriving with his horse steaming in the cold air and his coat crusted with snow. She always invited him in to warm up, and they would sit by her fire talking while the wind howled outside. "Christmas is in 2 weeks," Michael said one afternoon. "Ellen is planning a dinner. She would be honored if you would join us. I have not celebrated Christmas since Thomas died. I understand, but maybe it is time to start again, not forgetting him but choosing to live." Michael's blue eyes were gentle. "You have been doing so well, Jane. I have watched you come back to life these past months. Do not stop now." Jane stared into the fire, watching the flames dance. He was right. She had been doing better. The constant ache of grief had diminished to something more manageable. She still missed Thomas every day, but the pain no longer defined her every waking moment. And much of that change was due to the patient, persistent man sitting across from her. "I will come to Christmas dinner," she said softly. Michael's smile was like sunshine. "Thank you." Christmas at Kane Ranch was a revelation. Ellen had decorated the house with pine boughs and candles, and the smell of cooking filled every room. Several of Michael's ranch hands joined them, along with a few neighbors from surrounding properties. It was warm and loud and full of laughter. Everything Jane's lonely cabin was not. She helped Ellen in the kitchen, feeling useful and included. They prepared a feast of roasted turkey, potatoes, carrots, fresh bread, pies, and cakes. The men gathered in the sitting room, talking cattle and horses and politics. When dinner was finally served, everyone crowded around the long table, passing dishes and telling stories. Michael sat beside Jane, occasionally brushing her arm or catching her eye with a small smile. The touches were casual, almost accidental, but they sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. After dinner, Ellen brought out gifts, small things she had made or bought for everyone. She handed Jane a package wrapped in brown paper, and inside was a beautiful knitted shawl in deep blue. "I made it for you," Ellen said. "You need something warm for riding in winter." Jane felt tears prick her eyes. It had been so long since anyone had given her a gift, had thought of her with such care. "Thank you. It is beautiful." "There is one more thing," Michael said, pulling an envelope from his vest pocket. "This is for you." Inside was a document Jane had to read twice before she understood. "This is a breeding contract for Juniper. I am officially retaining your services as a horse breeder. That mare will produce excellent foals, and I want first option to purchase them. This is a business arrangement, completely proper, and the advance payment should help you get through winter." The amount listed made Jane's breath catch. "This is too much." "It is exactly right. You have a skill and a resource I need. This is not charity, Jane, it is good business." She looked at him, trying to read the expression in his eyes. Business maybe, but also something more, something that made her heart beat faster. "Thank you." That night, after the guests had left and Ellen had retired to her room, Michael walked Jane out to her horse. The sky had cleared and stars blazed overhead in the winter darkness. "I have something else for you," Michael said, pulling a small package from his coat. "But this one is not business. This is personal." Jane unwrapped it carefully to find a delicate silver locket on a chain. Inside was a tiny, perfectly painted portrait of a woman she did not recognize. "That was Catherine," Michael said softly. "I had a miniaturist in Cheyenne paint it from a photograph. I wanted you to have it because I want you to understand something. I loved my wife. I will always love her. But loving her does not mean I cannot love again. The heart does not have a limit on how much it can hold. Loving someone new does not diminish what came before." He reached out and gently placed the locket in Jane's hand, closing her fingers around it. "You do not have to decide anything tonight. But I want you to know that I am in love with you, Jane Harrison. I have been for months, and I am willing to wait as long as it takes for you to be ready to love again, if that day ever comes." Jane's throat was too tight to speak. She stood there with the locket warm in her palm and Michael's declaration hanging in the cold air between them. Part of her wanted to run, to retreat to safety. But a larger part, the part that had been slowly waking up over these past months, wanted to step closer. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I know, so am I." Michael cupped her face gently with one hand. "But I think we could be less afraid together." He leaned down slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away. When his lips met hers, it was soft and careful and full of question. Jane froze for half a heartbeat, then found herself kissing him back, her free hand coming up to grip his coat. The kiss lasted only seconds, but it felt like stepping through a doorway into a room she had thought locked forever. When they parted, Michael rested his forehead against hers. "I will not push. We can go as slowly as you need." Jane nodded, unable to form words. She mounted her horse, tucking the locket carefully into her coat pocket, and rode home through the winter night with her heart racing and her mind whirling. In her cabin, she sat by the fire for hours, holding the locket and Thomas's wedding ring, which she still wore on a chain around her neck. She thought about promises and memories, about the difference between honoring the past and being imprisoned by it. "I will always love you," she whispered to Thomas's memory. "But Michael is right. I cannot keep living like this. I think you would want me to be happy. I hope you would." The fire crackled, and in its warmth, Jane felt something like peace. January brought brutal cold and heavy snow that kept Jane confined to her cabin for days at a time. Michael arrived whenever the weather cleared enough to ride, always bringing supplies and staying to help with chores. They did not speak again of his declaration or their kiss, but something had shifted between them. The touches became more frequent, their gazes held longer, and the air felt charged with possibility. Ellen visited when she could, often staying overnight when the weather turned bad. She and Jane became genuinely close, sharing stories and confidences. Ellen admitted she had been in love with a ranch hand 3 years ago, but their father had forbidden the match, and the young man had left Wyoming rather than cause trouble. "You regret not fighting for him?" Jane asked one evening as they worked on mending clothes together. "Every day. But I was younger then and more afraid of disappointing father. Now he is gone and so is James, and I am left with what ifs." Ellen looked up from her sewing. "That is why I push you and Michael so hard. Life is too short and too uncertain to waste when you find something real." "How do you know it is real? How do you know it will not just end in more pain?" "You do not. That is the terrifying part. But choosing safety over love is not really living, is it? It is just waiting to die." The words haunted Jane for days. Was that what she had been doing? Just waiting to die? The thought was sobering and somehow galvanizing. When Michael came by next, Jane met him at the door with fresh coffee and a determination she had not felt in months. They sat at her small table, and she pulled out Catherine's locket, which she had kept with her constantly since Christmas. "Tell me about her," Jane said. "About Catherine." Michael looked surprised, but he began to talk. He told Jane about meeting Catherine at a dance in Cheyenne, about their courtship and brief marriage, about her laughter and kindness, and the plans they had made. He spoke without bitterness or excessive grief, just honest remembrance. "She would have liked you," he said finally. "She always said I needed someone who would not let me take myself too seriously. And Thomas would have liked you. He respected hard work and honesty above everything." Jane took a deep breath. "I cannot promise you I am ready for everything, but I am ready to try. If you are still willing to wait, to take this slowly." Michael's hand covered hers on the table. "I will take whatever you can give, at whatever pace you need. Then I need you to court me properly, not just helping with chores and bringing supplies. I need dinners and conversations, and time to figure out who we could be together." "That sounds perfect." From that day forward, Michael courted Jane with the same quiet persistence he had shown from the beginning, but now with clear, romantic intent. He brought her flowers, even though he had to ride an hour to a town big enough to have a shop that sold them. He took her on sleigh rides through the snow-covered valley. He read poetry to her by firelight, even though he admitted he found most poetry silly. Jane found herself laughing again, really laughing, and the sound startled her every time. She had not realized how silent her life had become, how much she had shut down. With Michael, she felt herself unfurling like a plant toward sunlight, February brought a thaw that turned everything to mud. Juniper came into season, and Michael arranged for her to be bred to his best stallion, a magnificent bay with proven bloodlines. Watching the horses together, Jane felt a flutter of excitement about the future. In 11 months, if all went well, she would have a foal to raise and sell. "What will you do with the money from selling your first foal?" Michael asked as they watched the horses from the fence rail. "Buy another mare if I can afford it. Start building a real breeding program like Thomas wanted." "That sounds like a long-term plan." "Does that mean you intend to stay in Wyoming?" Jane turned to look at him. "Where else would I go?" "I do not know. I just want to make sure you are staying because you want to, not because you feel trapped by circumstances." "I want to stay," she said firmly. "This is my home now. My land, my future. I am not running away from that." Michael smiled, and Jane realized he had been worried about her leaving. The thought that her absence would cause him pain made her chest tighten with an emotion she was not quite ready to name. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and turning the valley green seemingly overnight. Jane threw herself into planting her garden and making repairs to her cabin and outbuildings. Michael's cattle returned to her leased pasture, and the sound of lowing cattle and running water from the creek made the homestead feel alive again. On a warm April afternoon, Michael arrived with a picnic basket and a blanket. "Come with me. I want to show you something." They rode to the far corner of his property, where the land rose into foothills covered with wildflowers. Michael spread the blanket in a meadow with a view of the entire valley, and they ate cold chicken and fresh bread while watching hawks circle overhead. "This is my favorite place on the ranch," Michael said. "I come here when I need to think. It is beautiful. I thought you might like it." He reached into the basket and pulled out a small book. "I found this in the general store last time I was in town." Jane opened it to find a guide to horse breeding, with detailed information about bloodlines and training techniques. "This is perfect. I know you learn by reading and researching. I thought it might help with your program." Michael lay back on the blanket, his hat tipped over his eyes. "Jane, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever think about getting married again?" Her heart jumped. "Sometimes, more recently than before." "And what do you think?" Jane lay down beside him, staring up at the endless blue sky. "I think I used to believe that loving someone meant risking everything and probably losing. But you have taught me that love does not have to be about loss. It can be about building something together, about choosing to be brave." Michael rolled to his side, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at her. "I want to build that with you. A life, a partnership, a future. But only if you want the same thing." "I do," Jane said, and realized she meant it completely. "I want that with you." He kissed her then, longer and deeper than their first kiss, full of promise and passion and certainty. Jane wrapped her arms around him, holding tight, amazed that her damaged heart could feel this much without breaking. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Michael said, "Will you marry me, Jane Harrison?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They set the wedding for June, giving Jane time to prepare and Ellen time to plan. The engagement caused a stir in Tropic, with most people pleased but a few older biddies clucking about unseemly haste and proper mourning periods. Jane ignored them, secure in her decision. Ellen threw herself into wedding preparations with enthusiasm that bordered on mania. She commissioned a dress from a seamstress in Cheyenne, organized the ceremony, and invited what seemed like everyone in the territory. Jane let her take charge, grateful to have someone who genuinely cared managing the details. In quiet moments, Jane would hold Thomas's wedding ring and tell him about Michael, about her plans and hopes. It felt important to acknowledge that her first love had not been diminished, just joined by something new. She finally took off Thomas's ring and placed it in a small box with the few other mementos she had kept, not forgetting but making room. Michael spent his evenings with Jane when he could, always leaving well before dark to preserve propriety. They talked about their future, about combining their properties, about the life they would build. Michael made it clear he did not expect Jane to give up her homestead or become just a rancher's wife. "Your land stays yours," he said firmly. "We will add your name to the ranch accounts, and you will have equal say in decisions. I want a partner, not a dependent. That is not how most marriages work. Then we will not have most marriages. We will have ours, built on what works for us." The wedding took place on a perfect June morning at the small church in Tropic. Ellen had decorated the simple building with wildflowers, and what seemed like half the county crowded into the pews. Jane wore her new dress, a beautiful cream silk that made her feel like someone from a different life. Ellen stood as her attendant, and Richard Foster served as Michael's witness. As Jane walked down the short aisle, she saw Michael waiting at the altar in a new suit, his eyes locked on her with an expression of such love and certainty that any last doubts vanished. This was right. This was real. The preacher kept the ceremony simple, speaking about partnership and commitment and the blessing of second chances. When Michael slipped the gold band on Jane's finger, his hands were steady, and when she placed his ring, her own hands did not shake. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher announced, and Michael did thoroughly, to the cheers and applause of their guests. The reception took place at Kane Ranch, now officially their ranch, with tables set up outside and enough food to feed an army. People ate and drank and danced while Jane and Michael circulated, accepting congratulations and well wishes. Ellen cried happy tears and hugged Jane so tightly she could barely breathe. As the sun set and the party continued, Michael pulled Jane away from the crowd, leading her to the barn where it had all started at that first dance months ago. "Happy?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Terrified and happy," Jane admitted. "Is that normal?" "I think so." "We are embarking on something big." Michael kissed her forehead. "But we will figure it out together. That is what partners do." They danced in the quiet barn, no music except the distant sound of the fiddles outside, and Jane felt something settle deep in her chest. This was home. This man was her future, and she was ready for it. The first months of marriage had their challenges as Jane and Michael learned to merge their lives. Jane moved into the ranch house but kept her cabin, using it for her horse breeding operation. Ellen remained living at the ranch, and the three of them worked out a rhythm that mostly avoided stepping on each other's toes. Juniper had her foal in early spring, a strong colt with his sire's conformation and his dam's temperament. Jane was there for the birth, and the experience filled her with fierce pride and joy. Michael found her in the barn hours later, still watching the mare and foal, tears streaming down her face. "What is wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right." "I just wish Thomas could see this. He wanted this so badly." She turned to Michael. "But I am glad you are here. I am glad this is our life." Michael pulled her close. "He gave you the dream. We just get to live it. There is no dishonor in that." The colt sold for an excellent price, and Jane reinvested the money in another mare. Her breeding program began to take shape, gaining a reputation for quality. Michael supported her completely, proud of her success, never threatened by her growing independence and income. In the second year of their marriage, Jane discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had wanted children with Thomas, and that dream had died with him. Now it was returning, but with Michael, and the weight of that felt enormous. "What if I love this baby and something happens?" she confessed one night, her hand on her still flat belly. "What if I cannot survive another loss?" "Then we will face it together," Michael said, his hand covering hers. "But you cannot live your life afraid of what might happen, Jane. We could wrap ourselves in cotton wool and still not be safe. All we can do is love as hard as we can for as long as we have." Their son was born in February 1878, a robust baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Thomas Michael Kane, honoring both the past and the present. Jane held her son and wept, overwhelmed by love and gratitude, and the knowledge that her heart had somehow grown large enough to hold all of this. Michael was a devoted father, getting up for night feedings and changing diapers without complaint. Ellen doted on her nephew, and the ranch house rang with baby cries and laughter. Jane marveled at how full her life had become, how different from those dark days after Thomas's death. "I cannot believe I almost missed this," she told Michael one evening as they watched their son sleep in his cradle. "I almost let my fear keep me from all of this. But you did not. You chose to be brave. That is what matters." Over the next few years, their family continued to grow. A daughter arrived 2 years after Thomas, named Catherine Ellen after Michael's first wife and his sister. Then another son, then another daughter. The ranch house overflowed with children, noise, and life. Jane's horse breeding program flourished, becoming known throughout Wyoming and beyond. She hired help to manage the growing operation, but she remained intimately involved in every aspect. Michael's cattle operation expanded too, and together, they became one of the most successful ranching families in the territory. Ellen eventually married, a widower from Cheyenne who owned a freight company. She moved away but visited frequently, her own children playing with their cousins during long summer visits. The connection between the sisters-in-law remained strong, forged in those early days when Ellen had helped Jane find her way back to life. On their 10th anniversary, Michael and Jane rode out to the meadow where he had proposed. The children were old enough to be left with trusted hands for an afternoon, and they treasured the rare time alone. "You remember what you told me that first day?" Jane asked as they lay on a blanket, watching clouds drift overhead. "When I had a rifle pointed at you. You said you could not love again." Michael rolled to face her, his hand tracing the curve of her cheek. "Best thing that ever happened to me was proving you wrong. I am glad you did not give up. I am glad you were persistent and patient and refused to let me hide. I would have waited forever for you. But you did not have to. That is the miracle of it. I found my way back faster than I thought possible because you showed me it was safe to try." They made love there in the meadow, familiar bodies, and practiced passion. A decade of intimacy making every touch speak volumes. Afterward, wrapped in Michael's arms, Jane felt the kind of contentment she had never imagined possible in those dark days of early widowhood. Life was not perfect. They had arguments and challenges, sick children and drought years, disagreements about money and decisions. But they faced everything together, their partnership strong enough to weather the storms. Thomas Michael grew into a serious boy who loved horses as much as his mother, already showing talent for training and breeding. Catherine Ellen was wild and fearless, more interested in cattle and the ranch business. The younger children each developed their own personalities and passions, filling the house with constant activity. On a warm summer evening in 1888, 12 years into their marriage, Jane stood on the porch watching Michael teach their youngest son to rope a fence post. Ellen was visiting with her family, and the sound of children playing filled the air. Juniper grazed in the pasture, now an old mare but still producing quality foals. "I did not think I could love again," Jane said aloud, not talking to anyone in particular. I was so certain my heart was broken beyond repair. Michael came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What changed your mind?" A persistent rancher who refused to take no for an answer. "Who brought me apples and horses and hope, even when I did not want any of it." She leaned back against him. "You saved my life, Michael Kane." "No," he said softly. "You saved your own life by choosing to live it. I just got lucky enough to be part of the story." Jane turned in his arms, kissing him with the practiced ease of long familiarity and the passion that had never dimmed. Around them, their children played and the ranch hummed with life, and she knew with absolute certainty that choosing love had been the bravest and best decision she had ever made. The sun set over the Wyoming Valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and Jane Harrison Kane stood in the middle of her full, rich, beautiful life, grateful beyond measure that a persistent rancher had proven her wrong every single day until she finally believed in love again. Years continued to pass, each one building on the foundation Michael and Jane had laid together. The ranch prospered through careful management and hard work, becoming one of the most respected operations in Wyoming. Their children grew strong and capable, each one learning the value of honest labor and treating people fairly. Thomas Michael, at 18, took over much of the horse breeding program, his natural talent and his mother's teaching making him sought after as both a breeder and trainer. He had his mother's determination and his father's steady nature, a combination that served him well. Catherine Ellen, at 16, surprised everyone by showing more interest in the business side of ranching, spending hours poring over account books and planning expansion with her father. The younger children were still finding their paths, but each showed promise in their own way. The Kane family had become something of a dynasty in the territory, respected not just for their wealth but for their integrity and generosity. Jane's reputation as a horse breeder had grown beyond Wyoming. People came from as far as Texas and Colorado to purchase her stock, and she had bred multiple horses that went on to become champions in various competitions. What had started as Thomas's dream and become her lifeline had transformed into a legacy that would outlast them all. One crisp autumn morning in 1893, 17 years into their marriage, Michael found Jane in the barn with a new foal, one of Juniper's last before the old mare retired from breeding. The foal was exceptional, showing all the qualities that had made Jane's program successful. "This one is special," Jane said, running her hand along the foal's back. "I think we should keep him as a stallion. His bloodlines are impeccable." Michael watched his wife work, still amazed after all these years by her knowledge and skill. She was 41 now, with threads of silver in her dark hair and lines at the corners of her eyes, and he thought she had never been more beautiful. "Whatever you think is best," he said. "You have never steered us wrong with the horses." Jane looked up at him, a smile playing at her lips. "Remember when you first brought me Juniper? I was so angry that you kept trying to help me. You thought I pitied you. I was such a fool. I wasted so much time being afraid when I could have been loving you." She stood, brushing straw from her skirts. "If I could go back and tell that frightened widow anything, it would be to trust you sooner, to believe that hearts can heal and love can return." Michael crossed to her, pulling her into his arms despite their audience of horses. "You found your way in your own time. That is all that matters." They stood together in the quiet barn, the smell of hay and horses around them, and Jane reflected on how far she had come from that bitter young widow who had pointed a rifle at a stranger. That woman felt like someone from another lifetime, and in many ways she was. Jane had been reborn through love and partnership, transformed from someone who merely survived into someone who truly lived. Ellen visited for Thanksgiving that year, bringing her husband George and their 4 children. The ranch house overflowed with family, 3 generations gathering around the long table Michael's father had built decades ago. Jane looked around at the faces of her children and their cousins, at Michael and Ellen and George, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "I would like to say something," Jane announced, standing with her wine glass raised. The conversation died down, everyone turning to listen. 20 years ago, I came to Wyoming as a young bride full of dreams. When those dreams died with my first husband, I thought my life was over. I locked myself away from joy, from hope, from love itself." She looked at Michael, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And then a stubborn rancher refused to let me stay locked away. He brought me apples and horses and a future I could not imagine. He proved to me every single day that I could love again, that my heart was not as broken as I believed. Michael Kane, you gave me back my life. You gave me this family, this home, this beautiful, full, chaotic, perfect life. And I thank God every day that you were too persistent to take no for an answer." Michael stood and crossed to her, kissing her in front of their entire family, and everyone cheered. It was not the first time Jane had expressed her gratitude, but it never got old, this public acknowledgement of what they had built together. Later that night, after the guests had retired and the house had finally quieted, Michael and Jane sat in their bedroom, the fire crackling in the hearth. Jane brushed out her hair while Michael pulled off his boots, the comfortable routine of a long marriage. "You ever think about how different your life would be if you had not leased that pasture?" Jane asked. "Every day. I think about how close I came to never knowing you, and it terrifies me. I fought you so hard in the beginning. You were protecting yourself. I understood that." Michael climbed into bed, watching his wife in the firelight. "But I also knew, from almost the first moment I saw you, that you were worth fighting for, worth waiting for." Jane joined him in bed, settling into the curve of his body as naturally as breathing. "I love you, Michael Kane. I love Thomas, and I will always honor his memory. But what we have built together is its own beautiful thing. Not a second choice or a consolation prize, but something real and true and lasting. I love you too. Every day, more than the day before." They fell asleep wrapped together, secure in their love and their life, and Jane's last conscious thought was gratitude that she had found the courage to love again. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and the Kane family continued to grow and prosper. Thomas Michael married a rancher's daughter from Cheyenne, bringing a new generation to the family. Catherine Ellen surprised everyone by going to college in the East, one of the first women from their area to do so, returning with modern ideas about ranching that initially shocked but eventually impressed her father. The turn of the century brought changes to Wyoming and the West. The wild frontier that Jane and Michael had known was slowly disappearing, replaced by more civilization and law. But the core of what they had built remained strong: family, land, partnership, and love. On their 25th anniversary in 1903, Michael planned a surprise for Jane. He had commissioned a portrait artist from Denver to paint her with Juniper, who at 24 years old was now retired and living out her days in peaceful luxury. The artist captured Jane at 46, still beautiful, still strong, standing with the mare who had represented the beginning of her new life. When Michael unveiled the portrait, Jane wept. "It is perfect. This mare changed everything for me. She gave me purpose when I had none, hope when I had lost it. She was your gift to me, and through her I found my way back to life. And through you I found my way back to joy," Michael said, holding her close. "We saved each other, Jane. That is what love does." The portrait hung in their bedroom, a testament to second chances and the healing power of persistent love. Their children and grandchildren would look at it in years to come and hear the story of how their grandmother had declared she could not love again, and how their grandfather had patiently, persistently proved her wrong every single day until she believed in love once more. Jane and Michael Kane lived long lives, filled with the kind of deep contentment that comes from true partnership. They weathered droughts and boom times, sick children and healthy ones, arguments and reconciliations. Through it all, their love remained the foundation on which everything else was built. When Juniper finally passed at the age of 27, Jane mourned her like the dear friend she had been. They buried her on a hill overlooking the valley, and Michael held Jane while she cried for the mare who had represented so much more than just a horse. "She was my bridge back to life," Jane said through her tears. "Your gift to me, the beginning of everything we built." Then we will honor her memory by continuing to build, by continuing to love and live and create beautiful things. Michael kissed the top of her head. That is what she would want, what Thomas would want, what Catherine would want, for us to live fully and love deeply for as long as we have. And they did. Jane continued breeding horses into her 60s, though she gradually handed more responsibility to Thomas Michael and his wife. Michael managed the cattle operation with Catherine Ellen's help, the two of them forming a formidable business partnership. The younger children found their own paths, some staying on the ranch, others venturing into the changing world beyond. Ellen remained close until her death in 1910, her friendship with Jane one of the great constants of both their lives. At Ellen's funeral, Jane spoke about the woman who had welcomed her into the Kane family, who had encouraged her to take a chance on love when she was too afraid to try. "She told me that choosing safety over love was not living, just waiting to die," Jane said to the assembled mourners. She was right. She was always right about matters of the heart. I owe her everything for pushing me toward happiness when I wanted to hide in grief. Michael stood beside his wife, both of them older now but still strong, still together. They held hands through the service, drawing strength from each other as they had for over 3 decades. The years rolled on, bringing new challenges and new joys. The ranch adapted to changing times, incorporating new techniques and technologies while maintaining the core values Michael's father had established and Michael and Jane had reinforced. The Kane family became a Wyoming institution, known for integrity, quality, and treating people fairly. Thomas Michael eventually took over full management of the ranch, with his sister Catherine Ellen handling the business side from her office in Cheyenne. The partnership between siblings echoed the partnership their parents had modeled, proving that the lessons of love and respect had been well learned. In 1918, as World War I ended and the world celebrated peace, Michael and Jane celebrated their 40th anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a massive party that lasted 3 days. At 71 and 61 respectively, Michael and Jane were still sharp and active, though age had inevitably slowed them both. During the celebration, their eldest grandson asked Jane to tell the story of how she and Michael had met. The grandchildren had heard it before, but they never tired of the tale. Jane settled into her favorite chair, Michael beside her as always, and began the familiar story. "I was a widow who had given up on love," she said, her voice still strong despite her age. "I truly believed my heart had been broken beyond repair, that I would spend the rest of my life alone, just surviving day to day. And then your grandfather rode up to my property line with his surveyor and his persistence, and he refused to let me hide. I brought her apples," Michael interjected with a smile, "and she made pie, even though she did not want to admit she liked me." He brought me a horse, Jane continued, her hand finding Michael's automatically. A beautiful mare named Juniper, who became the foundation of everything we built. But more than that, he brought me patience and understanding, and the gentle insistence that I could love again, that my heart was strong enough to heal. She looked at Michael, their eyes meeting with the deep familiarity of 4 decades together. He proved me wrong every single day. He showed me that love does not diminish when shared, that hearts can hold more than we think possible. He taught me that second chances are real, that life can surprise us even when we think we know how the story ends. And she taught me that persistence pays off, Michael said, raising her hand to his lips. That patience and faith and refusing to give up on someone can lead to the greatest joy imaginable. She was worth every moment of waiting, every small step forward. She gave me a life beyond anything I could have dreamed. Their grandchildren listened, rapt, to this love story that had shaped their family. They saw in their grandparents what real partnership looked like, what commitment meant, what happened when 2 people chose each other every day for 40 years. As the celebration wound down and family members began departing, Jane and Michael stood on their porch, watching the sun set over the valley they had worked together for so long. The land spread before them, marked by decades of care and labor, dotted with cattle and horses bearing the Kane brand. "We built something good," Michael said quietly. "We built something lasting," Jane agreed. "Not just the ranch, but this family, these children and grandchildren who know what love looks like, who understand that hearts can heal and second chances are worth taking. Do you ever regret it? Choosing this life, choosing me?" Jane turned to face him fully, cupping his weathered face in her hands. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything, Michael Kane. You gave me back myself. I was so lost when we met, so certain I was finished with living, and you showed me I was wrong. Every single day, with your patience and persistence and stubborn refusal to let me hide, you proved I was wrong." He kissed her then, 40 years of love in that single gesture. When they parted, both had tears in their eyes, grateful beyond words for the life they had built together. Michael Kane passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1922 at the age of 75, with Jane at his side as she had been for 44 years. His death left a hole in the family and community that could never be filled, but his legacy lived on in the ranch, the family, and the values he had instilled. Jane mourned her husband deeply, but not with the desperate, drowning grief of her youth. This grief was softer, mixed with gratitude for the years they had shared and the love they had built. She wore both Thomas's ring and Michael's on a chain around her neck, honoring both loves without diminishing either. She lived another 8 years, remaining active in the ranch operations and spending time with her growing collection of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She told stories about both her husbands, keeping their memories alive, teaching younger generations about the different forms love could take. On a warm June day in 1930, Jane Harrison Kane passed away at the age of 73, surrounded by family in the house Michael had built. Her last words were about love, about the persistence that had saved her, about the beauty of second chances. They buried her next to Michael on the hill overlooking the valley, not far from where Juniper rested. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by the Kane family's generosity and integrity. Person after person spoke about Jane's strength, her business acumen, her horsemanship, and above all, her capacity to love deeply and well. Thomas Michael, now in his 50s and himself a grandfather, spoke at his mother's funeral about the lessons she had taught him. "My mother used to say that the bravest thing she ever did was choose to love again after loss. She taught us that hearts are stronger than we think, that love does not have limits, that persistence and patience can overcome even the deepest fear. She and my father built something beautiful together. Not just this ranch, but a family legacy of love and partnership that will continue for generations. The Kane Ranch continued to prosper under Thomas Michael's management, and then his children's and their children's after that. The horse breeding program Jane had started remained a cornerstone of the operation, with each generation building on her foundation. The values Michael and Jane had established, fairness and integrity and treating people with respect, remained guiding principles. In the family home, Jane's portrait with Juniper hung in a place of honor, and the story of the persistent rancher and the widow who thought she could not love again became family legend. Generations of Kane children grew up hearing how their great-grandparents had found each other, how love had triumphed over fear, how patience and persistence had built something beautiful and lasting. The land itself seemed to remember their love, the valley they had worked together for so many years. Tropic Creek still ran through the property, feeding the grass that sustained Kane cattle and horses. The mountains still provided their stunning backdrop, unchanged by the passage of time. And somewhere in the hills, 3 graves stood together, Michael and Jane and Juniper, the beings whose connection had started it all. The story of Michael and Jane Kane became more than just family history. It became a testament to the healing power of love, to the possibility of second chances, to the truth that hearts can hold more than we imagine possible. It proved that with persistence, patience, and faith, even the deepest wounds can heal, and people who think they can never love again can find themselves building beautiful lives with unexpected partners. Jane had been wrong when she declared she could not love again. But she had been right about one thing. Loving was terrifying because loss was always possible. What she had learned, what Michael had taught her through 4 decades of partnership, was that the risk was worth it. That choosing love over fear, life over mere survival, partnership over solitude was always the right choice. And so the land continued, the family continued, the legacy continued. The Kane Ranch stood as a monument to what 2 people could build together when they chose love despite fear, when they persisted through doubt, when they believed in second chances and the resilience of the human heart. The widow who thought she could not love again had been proven wrong every single day by the persistent rancher who refused to give up on her. And from that proof, from that persistent, patient, powerful love, had come a family, a legacy, and a story that would be told for generations as an example of what love could do when given the chance. In the end, Jane Harrison Kane's story was not about loss but about finding, not about endings but about beginnings, not about the limits of love but about its infinite capacity to heal and renew and transform. She had loved twice, deeply and well, and had been loved the same way in return. She had built 2 different lives with 2 different men, and both had been real and beautiful and true. That was the real miracle Michael had shown her, not that she could love again, but that her heart was vast enough to hold it all. The grief and the joy, the past and the present, the love that was lost and the love that was found. Hearts, she had learned, do not have limits. They expand to hold whatever we choose to give them. And Jane had chosen to fill hers with love, with family, with life lived fully and deeply. The persistent rancher had proven her wrong every single day, and she had spent the rest of her life grateful for his stubbornness, his patience, and his unwavering belief that she was worth the wait. Their love story became legend, passed down through generations, proof that even the most damaged hearts can heal and that love, when persistent enough, can overcome any obstacle, even fear itself.